So something I wanted to add in regards to the Android discovery. And it's a very important footnote that we should all be aware of. Right now, there is a growing push for this robot technology. And there are sex robots. There are speaking robots that show emotion, and you can speak to the robots. But basically, they're a mechanical being, a machine with some kind of silicone face on it. And this is being pushed onto the market, onto the mainstream, in order to create a false narrative. It's a false narrative to say to society that we are advanced and this is our evidence of a robot. Now, if you've been following my Android discovery over the last 7 or 8 years, you will know that there are synthetic humans that were created, that were engineered in 1939, 1940. That means that they had the science and the technology to engineer an artificial human being 70, 80 years ago. So their science is far advanced, and they don't want you to know that. And what they do is they create a false narrative. They call it a misdirection. Look, everybody, we have this mechanical robot. So that you don't see what I have pointed out, that there are these false humans, fake humans living among us. Call them androids, call them synthetic humans, call them artificial people. You can see from my video evidence that there's something going on. And the problem people have is this. This is why this mind control system works. This is why this false narrative is very powerful, and you have to watch out for it. It's because you are being educated to think that a robot, an artificial person, has to have mechanical parts and a computer chip. Whereas the artificial humans I have pointed out are not mechanical. They're made out of flesh and bone and blood. But what makes them artificial is that they were synthetically engineered using synthetic DNA. The DNA was engineered. And that DNA replicates, and they're able to replicate a human being using technology. They have technology to foster, to accelerate the creation of human beings and to incubate an artificial person based on some genetic blueprint. Now, whether they copy that blueprint from somebody, whether they splice DNA, or whether they, de novo create an entirely new genome, that is very difficult for me to know. I'm not a geneticist. I'm not a roboticist. I'm not a scientist. I have no scientific training whatsoever. And until we can get to their lab and to their underground installation, we don't know what they're using. But I know that since World War II or earlier, I suggest earlier, my research says even 100 years before that, or the late 1800s, that they have implemented this program of cloning, artificial humans, genetic engineering, gene splicing, hybridization, all of these things. And their techniques have improved since 1939, such that the artificial person today that they can engineer, the clone, even the clone, because they can remove somebody from the surface and they can replace them with a functioning clone. And if you know what to look for, there are some discrepancies. But most people don't have that visual acuity. Most people don't care. And most people are too busy, running around in fear and paranoia and following the latest media narrative. What's the media narrative of today, right? So most people, 99% of the population, will not know. And even if you say, well, there's something different, right? You don't know what it is. And again, it's the problem, it's the way to control a population. You censor and suppress this technology and this science. So therefore it doesn't exist. Therefore a person won't think that maybe that guy's a clone because that science doesn't exist. But the science does exist, it's just top secret. Right? And people like me, what I've done is I've said, well, I know it officially doesn't exist, but these people are artificial people. Therefore, the science does exist. That means we have been mind controlled. And for me to do that has come at a great cost. It's a great cost. Because when I first came out with this information, people called me crazy. And some of the stuff can make you crazy because you don't know how far to look, right? There's nothing established. There's no guideline. There's no book on artificial people. There's no science. I didn't go to school to study this stuff. So that I don't know the boundaries of this stuff. So sometimes you go a little too far and you dial it back. But most people, they don't go anywhere because they're in the box, right? Oh, I'm not allowed to think about people who are clones because no one told me. I know Paris is talking about androids, but he's not a scientist. And the android has no mechanical parts, like this mechanical robot that they keep showing me. Right? So there's a psychological paradigm that you have to overcome, right? In order to navigate this kind of information. And it's not easy. And most people will fall back and they will say, prove it. That's not enough proof. Maybe there's something wrong with the guy, right? Look, he talks about all kinds of stuff. Maybe he's wrong. Well, I will admit up front that my hypothesis and my discovery is not 100% completely detailed and discussed and accurate. It's not possible for me to do that. I have limited information, I have limited resources, and I have limited education and knowledge. I cannot give you 100%. In fact, this science is so advanced, I think it's going to take a lot of years to really figure out what I've discovered. What I first saw in 2008 would take decades to decode and to properly understand if we are willing to go there if we put some resources into it, if people are brave enough to go outside the box. If you're not up to it, if you're afraid, if there's no resources, if I'm the only person talking about this, it's going to be a long time before we understand it. Right? But we have to understand it. We have to understand that someone is using an advanced science to influence society, to determine the direction of an entire nation. Because whoever engineered the androids are not on the side of humanity. Right? How can I say that? Well, they have a science 1,000 years ahead of us. Right? They're using synthetic DNA. We didn't discover synthetic DNA until 2010. They were using synthetic DNA in 1939. So 70 years of scientific development. In 70 years, you know, we've gone into the computer age, into the nanotechnology in 70 years. These guys were at nanotechnology in 1939. And they didn't just discover synthetic DNA, they were engineering beings and programming them in 1939. You understand the difference, the scale. So it's not only 70 years. 70 years before we discovered synthetic DNA and we began our study of synthetic cells and synthetic engineering, right? Genetic engineering. This is where we're starting. They had mastered the technology to the level of creating artificial people and programming them, giving them a consciousness. Well, what does it mean when you can give an artificial person a consciousness? Where does the consciousness come from? Because now we're not talking about God. You know, we're talking about Genesis. When you're talking about artificial people, you're talking about Genesis. It's basically the end of God, because they have figured out how to transfer consciousness into another body, an artificial body. Transfer consciousness between bodies. To duplicate a person, a clone, and to give it a consciousness. Where does it come from? How do you program it? Artificial intelligence. What technology are they using to do all this stuff? Because we haven't invented it yet. So who invented it? Who gave them the science? Who are these people? Who are the people who engineered the advanced androids that are indistinguishable from humans, right? We're talking about major leaps in science and technology. So I understand that you have a challenge with this stuff, because none of this stuff is supposed to exist except in the movies. But that's a movie. It's just a movie. But this stuff exists. How does it exist, right? Not only you have this artificial person, not only do you have genetics, synthetic DNA, replicants, you have consciousness, you have artificial intelligence, you have this, so you have the science. The science to do all this stuff is mature enough to create a product. The technology, they've got to be using some kind of technology, some kind of some DNA accelerators, some DNA synthesizers, some computers. So they had computers and machines to print out DNA in 1939. Oh, we didn't discover DNA until 1953. And that was a big thing. That was like, wow, we discovered DNA. These guys are printing out, synthesizing DNA, the artificial DNA. Do you understand? So you understand the level of advancement. It's huge. It's a huge step. Don't think you can do this overnight. I've had my own challenges to understanding this stuff. Huge challenges. You know, and there's a lot more to look at. There's a lot more that I don't understand. But I do understand what I've seen, the evidence, the video evidence. And I've done the analysis, I've written about it. My research is discussed. I discuss all the details, all the ideas, everything I put into my book, Androids Among Us, or the other title, Persons Artificial. Persons Artificial. That's, you know, that's as much as we can put inside there. There are some more advanced ideas. There are some more advanced models that I cannot discuss because they're too difficult to differentiate. The qualities that make them artificial are well beyond my scientific understanding and my ability to communicate it. It would basically just be me saying, that's an android. And it would be you saying, what do you mean? And be me saying, well, see that, and say, looks normal to me. And it would be an argument. So we're not there yet. So I'm saying there's other stuff that's even more advanced. Stuff is more advanced. So, but we need to start with the basics. We need to, we need to process this stuff. We need to speak about it. We need to get out there. We need to understand it. We need to ask for the truth, ask for more information. You need to look more closely because you're missing a lot of information. The advanced science, the android, they function at a higher frequency, right? So if you're at a lower frequency, you can't see them. So you need to raise your frequency. You need to raise your frequency. And so one of the ways that they've done this is they've lowered the human frequency, distracted people, and immersed them in chaos, and they can't see, right? And what I've done, I've lifted myself out of this thing at great sacrifice to my personal life, but I've raised my frequency and I've been able to see things that people have labeled me as crazy. I think the future will show that, yeah, some of my ideas may have been a little off. I admit that. It's not a perfect thing, but some of my ideas have been spot on. And I think the android work is fundamentally accurate, even if some of the details or understanding may need to be, developed. This is a very advanced science. And, we're talking about the creation of life. We're talking about Adam and Eve. Because if these guys can create Adam and Eve, then guess what? Someone created Adam and Eve. And it wasn't God. It was a group of scientists that are so advanced that it seemed like divine, seemed like magic, that the only way that a primitive brain could understand it is to say it's divine, it's holy, right? A science that's so advanced that we call it holy, right? But maybe it's just a very advanced science, right? And now we are becoming more advanced society that we can understand this, right? And the more advanced we become, the more we can understand it. So just be careful of this false narrative of a mechanical robot. Because it's the same thing they did with the space race, the space age.
Okay, cut.
Right? The Apollo missions. Oh, look, Apollo's going to the moon. But meanwhile, they had anti-gravity spacecraft. They had back-engineered alien spacecraft. They had developed a secret space program while they were feeding people this Apollo 11 moon mission, right? Space shuttle that was designed to go nowhere. It didn't go anywhere. We're going to put a lunar lander on the moon, a lander on Mars, the Mars lander. All this distraction, all of this false narrative to hide the secret space program. So the mechanical robots is a false narrative to hide these synthetic humans. Be aware of that. And there's more stuff, there's more of this going on. They create these false narratives to hide something. So as soon as you see a false narrative, you know that they're hiding something. You know they're confirming that this conspiracy, this hypothesis is more accurate than it originally appeared. Okay? Then you start focusing on that hypothesis. You start focusing on that theory. Because the false narrative is a confirmation. They're trying to hide something. Climate change is a false narrative to hide the climate weapons. You see the pattern, right? See the pattern. So a lot of you people following my work should know this by now. And we shouldn't have to always discuss this stuff. When they say climate change, it's a false narrative because there's climate weapons. When they say Apollo mission, mission to Mars, space shuttle, it's a false narrative because they got a secret space program where they can fly around the whole solar system. They have advanced craft. And they've had it for at least 30 years, 30 or 40 years at least. When they got these mechanical robots, right? Oh, mechanical robots, look at that. We can create robots. It's a false narrative because they've got synthetic humans and they've had it for a long time. Okay,